Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and this is a companion video for the first clue of Into the Hoods. Into the Hoods is 2025's fall mystery knit along, and I am so excited to take this journey with you all. Clue one is extra fun because we all kind of get to start on the same path together. Your Into the Hood starts the same way, whether you are knitting the balaclava, the dicky, or the scarf. The only differences in this video are going to be if you're working the one color or two color version. If you are just seeing this video and you don't know what Into the Hoods is, I do have a separate trailer that kind of sets you up and explains the mystery knit along, tells you what a mystery knit along is. It tells you about the 3 different shapes and how to choose yarn. And most importantly, it talks to you about working gauge. So if you haven't watched that video yet and or read through the pattern for that section, I highly suggest you do that before you start with clue 1. It's important for me to tell you that I am going to be going over techniques for the pattern in this video, but you do need to have purchased the pattern and follow along with it for stitch counts and what you'll be doing for your knitting. This is merely a companion, not a step-by-step tutorial. It would be really boring if I was knitting the whole thing with you. So grab your yarn, grab your needles, grab your stitch saver, and let's cast on together. I am super excited to teach you this cast on. It is a brand new cast on for me, and I think you're going to have a very good time learning it. One thing I'm going to say before we start is if you're somebody when you work a mystery knit along who gets nervous that you might run out of yarn, or you want to know kind of how much yarn you're using for each clue, before you start this clue, weigh your yarn. If you're doing the one color version, just weigh your single color. If you're doing the 2 color version, weigh your MC and weigh your CC and write those weights down. That way, at the end of the clue, you can weigh your yarns again and subtract them from your original weight, and that will give you an idea of how much yarn clue 1 worked. I have a good idea from all the testers of like what percentage of your yarn should get used up in clue 1. It's a little different for everybody because we're all using different yarns, but that's a way to kind of help you see if you're staying on track, especially if you were worried that you don't have enough yarn. As we get into future clues, I'll give you some tips if I think there's some ways that you can kind of save yarn or think about it if you're worried you're going to run out. So you're going to be working the cast on with needle A, which is the largest needle size. It is 1 size bigger than you use to get gauge. If you're working the single color version, then you're just grabbing your yarn. If you're working the 2 color version, you want to do this cast on with your MC, which is your main color. And for those of you that are very good and read your pattern before you're casting on, you'll notice in the getting ready part, I said that if you're working the 2 color version and you have wound your yarn into a ball where you cannot pull any yarn from the center of your ball, then before you cast on, you're going to want to save about a 40-inch length of your main color. This is going to get used at the very beginning of clue 2. If you're working from a yarn where you have a second ball of your MC, or you can pull from the inside of your MC, then you don't need to worry about cutting that length. So now that we've gone over those tiny little details that I don't want to get lost in the woods or in the bushes or whatever, let's go ahead and do this cast on. So I'm grabbing my needle A and I'm grabbing my main color, and I'm also grabbing a length of stitch saver. You want to have a length of stitch saver for this clue that is about 30 inches long. I'll give you a link below to Stitch Saver if you've never heard of it before. If you do not have any Stitch Saver on hand, you can do all of these maneuvers over a spare cable from an interchangeable set or over a spare cable of a needle that has a smaller tip on it. but I find that working with Stitch Saver is easier because it's much lighter and it doesn't distort your stitches the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to make a slip knot. And once I have that slip knot made, I'm going to take that slip knot and I'm going to put that slip knot on to my stitch saver right here. And what I'm getting ready to do is to provisionally cast on 3 stitches onto my stitch saver. Now, if you've never done this technique before, I do have a separate video that does a deep dive, but you will see that your pattern says to cast on 3 stitches, which is an odd number of stitches. So the first thing that you're going to do for this cast on is take your needle tip and go in front of the stitch saver, go underneath it, grab your working yarn and bring that working yarn up. And now you'll see you have 1 stitch on your needle. And now I'm going to make a yarn over onto my needle, and then I'm going to dive down and grab that yarn again. And now I have 3 stitches on my needle. Remember with these videos that you can slow things down. If you want to see it more slowly, you can watch that again a few times if you want to. So once I have 3 stitches on my needle, you'll also see that I have 3 stitches on my stitch saver plus that slip knot from the very beginning. Ignore that slip knot. We'll be dropping it later on, but do not drop it now. I will tell you in the pattern when it's time to drop that. Now what you're going to do is turn your work and then bring your yarn to the back of your needle so that you are all set up to knit 3. And I'm going to go ahead and knit across all 3 of those stitches. And now I have 3 stitches on my needle, and you will not turn your work. Now what you're going to be doing is taking your stitches and sliding them to the other end of your needle. You probably guessed what we're doing right now. We're doing a little I-cord cast on. But what we're going to do as we do this I-cord cast on is we're going to be wrapping our yarn around the stitch saver right there. And what that's going to do is make it so that we don't have to pick up stitches along the I-cord edge. This is a pretty slick way to do an I-cord cast on without having to pick up stitches. So now that I have slid those stitches to the other end of the needle, what I'm going to do is wrap my yarn around that stitch saver, and then I'm going to knit 3. And then at the end of every row, I do not turn my work. I slide my stitches to the other end of my needle, and then I keep that stitch saver right there on the inside of the I-cord. So I'm wrapping my yarn over the stitch saver, and then I knit 3. Depending on the version you're making, the 1 color or 2 color, your cast on is going to be different for the number of rows you're working. But I'm about to show you, after I do this 3rd row, a very cool way that you can tell how many rows you have worked. So that's my 3rd row right there. And if I turn this over, you will see on the bottom right here the wraps from where I'm wrapping that yarn across the stitch saver. So I can see I've got 1, 2, 3, and then right here are my provisionally cast on stitches, and my slip knot is right there. So I've got my 1, 2, 3 provisionally cast on stitches and my slip knot, and then there are my wraps right there. If you want to, after you do that provisional cast on, you can actually slide a stitch marker onto your stitch saver so that that will separate the provisionally cast on stitches from the wraps if you start to get lost in that a little bit. So you're going to continue doing this. If you're knitting the 1 color option, you're going to end up with 28 wraps around your stitch saver. And if you're doing the 2 color option, it is 27. I have a step out ready to go that has only 10 on it. But when you have the correct number of wraps coming along the back of your stitch saver right there, what you're going to do is turn your work, and then you're going to purl one, and then you're going to slip one with yarn in back, and then you're going to purl one. And then you'll see the last thing that the pattern says is to slide these stitches onto the other end of your stitch saver. So see that slip knot right there on your stitch saver? Grab that end of the stitch saver and go ahead and slide all of those stitches onto that end of your stitch saver. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab one of these that has a few more stitches on that. We're on the last part of the setup for that cast on, and I just wanted to switch over to a setup that had a few more stitches on it. So I've got those 3 stitches that are the I-cord stitches on one end of the stitch saver. And now I'm going to take the end of the stitch saver that I'd been using for wrapping the yarn around, and I'm going to put my needle B into it. So you're switching over to your needle B, and now you're going to slide all of your wraps from the stitch saver, and I'm just going to get this up here, and then I'm going to move my hand out of the way so you can see this really beautifully, from the stitch saver onto the needle. And what I did was just put my needle onto that stitch saver right there, so I can just slide the needle right in following the stitch saver. What I did not do was slide the provisionally cast on stitches onto that needle. So those are going to stay on the stitch saver. And now I've got all of my stitches all set up and ready to go on needle B. If I was to turn this around so the right side was facing, you can really easily see what's happening with this cast on now. I've got the I-cord cast on with the needle kind of going right down the middle of it. I've got my working yarn right here over on the left-hand side, and then the provisionally cast on stitches right here. So now we are all set up to start with the 1 color version for the top. If you are working the 2 color, you are welcome to watch this section, or you can skip ahead to the 2 color section. That is up to you. We have everything timestamped below for you, so it's really easy to jump around. All right, I am on the setup row right now, and I'm going to be knitting this a tiny bit differently from you. Your pattern says to knit 5, place a marker, knit to the last 5 stitches. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to do it with 3 stitches just to make it a little easier to see what is happening. And so I'm going to knit 3, and then I'm going to place a marker, and I'm going to place a kind of plain marker for this first marker. And then I am going to knit to the last 3 stitches. Again, read your pattern. You're going to be knitting to the last 6 stitches. So, sorry, last 5 stitches. Watch my words there. I don't want to mess you up. And then I am going to place a marker again. And this marker I'm going to place one of my little chippies right here. I'm going to place him because that's going to help me know when I'm on the right side of my work. Remember, I am working the wrong side right now. And once I have finished this row, that is the set up row, which was wrong side. And now I'm ready to kind of get into the guts of the top of my hood. And you are all set up with the stitch saver right here. So you're going to be able to work a technique that I love called Lola's pickup line up the edge of your fabric as you're working it. So you will notice that the stitch saver is laying over my yarn, and then I'm wrapping my yarn around the stitch saver right there, and I'm pulling up just a little bit tight. And then those first stitches are going to be worked in ribbing. And make sure to follow your pattern. I'm going to knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. And then I'm going to slip my marker, and then I'm going to knit to the next marker. Now, one thing that I did in this pattern is I don't write slip marker into every line because it just made it so many words. Those markers are there as breadcrumbs, so you know when you're working your ribbing, you'll just slip them when you come to them. So I'm at my last 3 stitches here. Remember, you'll have 5 at the end, and I'm going to knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. And now I'm going to turn my work. And again, at the beginning of the wrong side row, I want to wrap my yarn around the stitch saver. What this is going to do is make it so we don't need to pick up stitches later, which you know is one of the things I don't love to do very much. So now I am on this wrong side row, and I am going to purl 1, and I am going to knit 1, and I am going to purl 1, and then I am going to slip the marker, and then I am going to knit to my next marker, and then I'm going to slip that marker right there, get him back on, and I am going to purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. And you are going to be continuing like this until you have 30 wraps going up the edge of your stitch saver. It's important that you don't count those provisionally cast on stitches as part of your wraps. So right now I only have 1 wrap right there on my stitch saver. The only other tip that I really want to show you for clue 1 that I think is pretty important is one thing is make sure that you're pulling up tight when you go to wrap your yarn around the stitch saver to make things nice and tight and tidy. And the other thing is that many people find that their 1 by 1 ribbing is a little bit sloppy. And so one of the things I love to do to neaten it up is I love to work my purls with the left leg to the front of the needle. So typically when I work a purl so I've got the right leg to the front and left leg to the back. I like to work them opposite. Some people call this combination knitting. And that makes your 1 by 1 ribbing much neater. So I'm going to just show you that going across on right side and wrong side rows so you can see what that combination knitting looks like. So if you work a few rows of this and you're not happy with how your ribbing looks, if you switch over to combination knitting, you might decide that you got into the flow and it's really easy knitting and you're going to rip out and try it again. I honestly, almost every project I knit, it takes me about 3 times to really get going and be happy with my knitting. So I'm just at that stitch marker right there. I'm going to knit 1. When I come to that purl, I'm going to wrap it with the left leg to the front, and then I'm going to knit 1. And then when I turn my work and I come to the wrong side, I'll be doing the same thing. The yarn is always coming behind that stitch saver. This first stitch right here is a purl stitch, so I'm going to wrap it with the leg to the left. And then that next stitch was a purl stitch from the previous row. So I'm going to be knitting it now, but you'll see I'm just knitting it through that back loop to make sure that it stays nice and open. And that's the trick with that. You don't want to end up twisting your stitches when you do that. You always want that open upside down U right there. And now I'm going to slip that and knit to the last 3 stitches. So that might be new to you. For those of you who've done this before with 1 by 1 ribbing, you'll understand what I'm talking about. You don't have to work your ribbing like that, but if you're unhappy with how your stitches work, that's a little trick to make them neater. Sometimes when I learn a new technique like this, I like to grab just some like other yarn and needles and try out some 1 by 1 ribbing to see which technique I like better, see which is a little bit easier, not be throwing in that Lola's pickup line at the same time. But that is up to you if you want to do some practicing before you dive into it. You do have a whole week to do this clue, and she's not a big clue. So use it as an opportunity to do a little bit of learning along the way. Um, One thing I have now is I can show you a finished clue one, but I want to give those of you an opportunity to kind of scrub ahead if you don't want to see it. There's some people who, when they do mystery knit alongs, don't want to kind of like see a spoiler of the finished shape. And then I know many others of you like to see what you're knitting to get an idea of what it's going to look like. So when you are done with the one color clue one, it is going to, let me just flip my chippy around so he looks pretty. It says hello to us. That one's got a nice flower. Um, this is the right side of clue one, and you will see that you've got the stitch saver coming up the edge. You'll be just counting those wraps along the edge, remembering to not count the 3 stitches from the I-cord cast on each side. And then you'll be working some decrease rows that just decrease your shaping a little bit right here, and that is at the top and back of the hood. It just kind of helps with the curve and the turn of the hood. So that is your clue one for those of you doing the one color. And the next thing that I'm going to do is talk with everybody who's doing the 2 colors, some tips and tricks to help them keep track of things. Okay, 2 color Into the Hoodsers. Is that a word? I have a little I-cord cast on happening underneath the needles right here in my main color. And you will have 27 wraps that were on your stitch saver that got transferred over to your needle. And right now I have the wrong side facing. And what I'm going to do is be knitting across those 27 stitches that you've transferred to your needle. And that was all in the cast on section that we went over how to do that. It was the same for 1 color and 2 color. So I clearly have fewer than 27 stitches on my needles. I have enough on here so you can really follow what I'm doing and understand the techniques. So I've knit all the way across, and then all that's left on my stitch saver right now are my 3 stitches from my cast on and from finishing off the I-cord right there, and also that little slip knot, and we'll be addressing him in clue 2. So now what I'm going to do is I've worked the setup row, which was to knit across. And now I'm going to work a technique of mine called Lola's pickup line. And I'll be working this up the edge of clue 1 on both right side and wrong side rows. And at the beginning of every row, you're going to have your yarn underneath your stitch saver and then wrapping around it before you go to work across the row. And row 1 is very easy because we're just wrapping that yarn around and knitting across. If you've never worked Lola's pickup line before, I do have a separate video on how to work that. It's very easy. I know it might be new to some of you. It is a technique that I use because I do not like picking up stitches, and it helps your edges be nice and tight and tidy. And now I am at the end of row 1, so I'm turning my row to the beginning, my work to the beginning of row 2. I've got my yarn behind my stitch saver again. I'm wrapping around that stitch saver, and now I'm going to go ahead and knit 3 and purl to the last 3 stitches and knit 3. Remember, as I'm working this video, I'm teaching you technique, but you should be reading from your pattern. This is just to help you with technique, because I think sometimes seeing something is worth a million words. I know I'm at my last 3 stitches, and I am going to knit 3. Now it is time for me to introduce the contrast color. And the first edition of the contrast color is a little funky because we want to be creating a wrap around the stitch saver, but clearly this contrast color is not anchored to anything. So the way that I figured out to do that is, first, you want to make sure that you have your main color just behind your stitch saver right there. And now just for this first one, I've got my contrast color over the stitch saver, and I'm going to go ahead and start knitting across the row. And that's going to feel really loosey-goosey and funny. And clearly I am not attached right now to the stitch saver right there, which I really want to be. So I'm going to get that main color out of the way. And what I'm going to do is take my stitch saver, take my contrast color, come underneath the stitch saver right there, and then kind of tuck it in below itself so that that tail is locked into place. And now I can pull down on that, and I'm making myself kind of a firm wrap right there so that the contrast color is anchored around the stitch saver. That was one of the only things that my testers had a hard time doing without seeing it. So I think it really helps to see just how to integrate a new color in when you're doing Lola's pickup line. So now I am knitting all the way across right here. And now I'm going to turn my work so that I've got my wrong side facing. And I am going to wrap my yarn around so I've got the stitch saver over. And I am going to knit across to the end of the row. And then we're going to look at what happens when we switch back to the MC with the stitch saver on that edge. It's going to be a little important to look at that. I think last year somebody had asked me, like, how do I do 2-color work with Lola's pickup line? And I took that as a, oh, this is a learning opportunity. Maybe we'll do this in Mystery Knit Along. Okay, so now I'm just going to move this over here so things are really obvious. I am ready to work row 3, and row 3 is worked with the main color. So you can see I've got my contrast color coming underneath the stitch saver. My main color is underneath the stitch saver. And now it's going to come over right here in between the stitch saver and the needle so that it's wrapping around the stitch saver, right? The stitch saver is still laying over the main color. But you'll see what starts to happen is you'll be alternating between the contrast color and the main color as you're working up one side of the stitch saver. And now I'm wrapping that there and I'm starting to work across. And now I have a separate step out that is ready to work row 5, which has kind of a new technique with the contrast color. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that and show you a new stitch. All right, it's time to tell you about the bush stitch, which I love this little bush stitch. You're going to get very familiar with the bush stitch as you work into the hoods. And so I am on row 5, which has our first bush stitch, and I'm working that with my contrast color yarn. So you can see that I've got my main color and my contrast color underneath that stitch saver. I'm just wrapping it over just like that. I work it the same way on every row. And now I'm going to go ahead. You're going to have a different stitch count on your work, obviously, than I do on mine. But I'm going to be knitting 5. And then I'm going to be working the bush, which is on the abbreviations page of your pattern. And that's going to be a knit 1, yarn over, knit 1, yarn over, knit 1. All of those stitches are worked into the same stitch. So I've actually increased 4 stitches whenever I work a bush. So depending how many bushes you're working across the row, you're increasing 4 stitches for each bush. And now I've knit to the end of the row, and I am going to turn my work, and with the contrast color, I'm just going to be knitting back across. I'm not going to be doing anything to those new stitches. So I'm just going to wrap my yarn around my stitch saver as I do at the beginning of every row for this clue, and I am knitting across. Now, the next row is a main color row. And what we're going to be doing over the next 2 main color rows is be decreasing down those extra stitches that we added when we worked the bush stitch. So I've given you the counts for how to do this, but I want to show you the why, because it'll really help you see if you're losing track of where you are in your pattern. Basically, what's happening is you're working up to 1 stitch before the bush stitch. So you can see right here, there's my bush stitches right there. And then I'm working up to 1 stitch before. That's a knit 4 in your pattern. And now I'm going to knit 2 together. And then I'm going to knit 3. Those are the center 3 stitches of your bush. And then I'm going to work a slip, slip knit. And then you will continue across. You will have more stitches on your needles. And so you're going to have more of those decreases to work. And now on the wrong side row, you're going to be, let's see, I don't want to mess this up. I've been doing so beautifully. You're going to start out with a knit 3. And then you're going to purl 1. And now you've got to purl 2 together through the back loop, which some of you might not have done before. All you're going to do is take your needle tip and come into the back of the second stitch and the back of the first stitch, just like that. So the needle's kind of pointing at you. And then you're going to wrap the yarn around and pull it through. And then the next stitch, you're going to just slip with your yarn to front. That's the center stitch of your bush stitch. And then you're going to work a purl 2 together. I am going to tell you that if you do not love working the purl 2 together through the back loop, you can just work a purl 2 together and it's absolutely fine. No one is going to know that you did that. I like to work the purl 2 together through the back loop. Now I'm at my last stitches and I'm going to knit 3. Remember, you're going to have more stitches as you're working across. But that kind of helps you see what's happening with your bush stitch. You're increasing stitches and then you're decreasing back down again to make that lovely little dollop. It's kind of like a noop, but it's not a noop. It's not a bobble. She's a bush. So you're going to continue working clue 2. There's nothing really new to teach you. Towards the end of clue 2, you'll see that you'll end up with 38 wraps on each side of your stitch saver and also those 3 cast on stitches. You can count your wraps. I think it's a little easier to count on this side because you don't have both yarns being held up. Just remember that those first 3 stitches don't count as the wraps. Those are your stitches that are held from the I-cord. So you'll be counting those wraps going up right there. I am about to show you what your 2-color clue 1 looks like when you're done with it. So if you don't want to see this, just scrub ahead to the end of this video. Here is a little mini version of what the top of clue 2 work looks like. You can see that this is the cast on edge. These are your stitches that you're ending up with on your needle. You will end up with the same number of stitches that you've started with, 27 right there, and you are all ready to work clue 2. I have a feeling that a lot of you are going to knit one clue 1 and be in the mood to knit a second one before clue 2 comes out. So I'm excited to see what other yarns you're going to choose. I am happy to answer questions if you have any. One thing that I would suggest is we have a Ravelry group to ask questions. We have a Facebook group to ask questions. We also have below this video, I have an eye on everything on all 3 places, which is a lot. It's also really fun, but it is helpful for me if you only ask questions in one place. Like if you ask question in Ravelry, don't also go ask it over in the Facebook group. It just makes more work for everybody. And it also makes the forums more clogged up. So choose a place that you like to ask questions and answer questions. Also, as you are knitting your clue one and you're understanding what's going on, if you see somebody else that has a question and you think you can explain it to them in a different way, go ahead and do that. One of the things I adore about mystery knit alongs is what incredible community builders they are and the friendships that are forged through them. So we are all in this together. We are all on this hike. We have a no knitter left behind in the woods policy. So as long as you are going to ask questions and stay inquisitive and want to learn, we are there to help you in any one of those places. As you finish your clue one, please post them. I want to see them in all of their glory. I have a theory about mystery knit alongs that once you have finished your clue and you've posted a photo of it, that's good to go. Like you'll start to see other people's, they'll get you excited to finish them. It'll help you see what yours is supposed to look like. So please do post those. Did I already say I'm excited? I'm excited. So the next clue comes out October 29th. That is going to be clue number 2. There will be another video to help you out. And I look forward to seeing you back here then. Happy knitting.